Hello, and welcome to Sound and Image Lab, the Dolby Institute podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. I usually introduce this podcast as a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories. But today you could say this episode is about how artists use their movies to win Oscars. This morning, the Academy Award nominations came out, and we are here to get some first reactions and talk about what we learned this morning. We thought it'd be fun to have an impromptu conversation reacting to the nominees in some of our favorite categories, Best Sound and Best Cinematography. So I invited some friends to join us today for a conversation to offer their honest gut reactions to the Oscar nominations. So joining us this morning are pop culture writer for Screen Junkies, Lon Harris, awards correspondent and nextbestpicture.com columnist Will Mavity, and the senior artisans editor from Variety, Jazz Tankay. So who do they think should win? Who do they think will win? Who got snubbed? What were the big surprises this morning? Let's find out. Well, thank you, Jazz, Will, and Lon for joining us on the Dolby Institute podcast today. It's an exciting day. I don't know about you guys, but I was up this morning. I watched the live nominations. I asked you all to join us on the podcast today to get your kind of first reactions and thoughts about the Academy Award nominations that just came out this morning. I invited you all on the show because I follow you all on Twitter. I feel like, you as the three of you are sharply perceptive about sound and cinematography, which are a couple of the categories that are very near and dear to our hearts at Dolby. And we're going to be doing our normal Oscar episodes and doing deep dives on those categories. So, but before we even, kind of get into sound and cinematography, it's just as we speak now, it's just a few hours after the nominations came out. And I just wanted to kind of open up and ask you guys, any what's first responses, any big surprises for you this morning? Any kind of moments that made you kind of gasp as you saw the list? Who wants to jump in and start?
I'll go first. Kristen Stewart for Spencer. I was happy to see that. I've been a big fan of her for a while. I enjoyed that movie. I understand that not everybody loved that as a movie, but I thought her performance, so much of the movie was centered on her performance. I thought it was very strong. She was making a lot of very interesting choices. And I was really delighted to see in terms of her getting an acting nomination. And also Jessie Buckley for Lost Daughter. I was really happy to see her pull it. Another person I've been just a big fan of and been watching in a lot of stuff lately. And she's had a great couple of years. And what a movie. I really like that movie too. So those two were really nice. In terms of snubs, I was disappointed that Denis Villeneuve got overlooked for Dune. I thought with all the nominations and the attention, he was sort of a shoe in there. And there's a lot of anti-Belfast sentiment out there. I liked Belfast, but Braun not getting a nomination over Denis, that did not go down super easy.
I think that's a great point. As the nominations, as they were reading the nominations for director and it got down to that last slot, I thought, oh my gosh, it's either going to be Spielberg or Denis, and somebody's going to, there's about to be a big upset. And I gotta be honest, like for a second, I thought it would probably go the other way. I was a little surprised at that.
That's what I was predicting. Yeah.
But I don't think anybody had not predicted Denis. Like that was the thing. Like I think most of us had him in our predictions. So I think to your point, Lon, that was probably one of the biggest surprises, one of the many of the morning, but or snubs, whichever way you want to point that. But one thing that I genuinely loved was seeing Drive My Car come in. There's this whole discourse, on Twitter about films that run at like 90 minutes or longer, and I don't want to watch it. Drive My Car is like 2 hours, 59 minutes. And here it is with a Best Picture nomination, getting 3 nominations in total. And so that was a pleasant, thing to see this morning. But to the hope, to Tracy Ellis Ross and Leslie, just what banter they had. It was like, they need to host the Oscars because they're brilliant. Like she's like, you stole my line, and they're naturally comedic together. So yeah, that was the beginning part of the morning that I guess I loved to see.
Weren't we supposed to be getting a host announcement today? I thought that was supposed to be part of the nominations.
I don't know if they had officially announced that, but I think everybody sort of assumed this would be the natural time to be like, and here's your host.
Interesting.
The Muppets.
The Muppets.
Yeah, so, I would watch the hell out of that.
I would totally watch that.
That's what it should be.
You just gave me an idea of the Oscars as hosted by Waldorf and Statler. I think that would be. I would definitely tune in for that. Sure, for sure.
Just up the entertainment value. Get people watching.
Yeah, so I second the drive my car comment. I think what's particularly cool is that Janus Films, who was distributing that, didn't have the kind of campaign war chest that really any of the other studios in play had. And so that was a film that it was pretty unprecedented for it to be able to not only get into a smaller branch like the director's branch, but to successfully crack the Best Picture field with a campaign that was almost entirely word of mouth and run by critics. Like that was unprecedented, and I think shows that some of the Academy's attempts to bring in new voices have helped. And I think we saw that throughout a lot of the nominations this morning. You know, a lot of things weren't just based on the same old that we got with each guild. You know, you mentioned Jessie Buckley. That was a big one. I love seeing Penelope Cruz get in, even without any of the precursors. The worst person in the world in screenplay was a big shock for me, and I loved that. So, I thought there were some really nice surprises across the board. Katrina Balfe missing for Judi Dench for Belfast, that really shocked me.
Yeah, I feel like, well, one of the things you're kind of touching on there is that, you know, obviously, and the backstory is that the membership of the Academy has been dramatically increased in terms of numbers of members in the past few years as part of a diversity push, a well-deserved, muchly needed diversity push on the part of the Academy. But I don't know I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I think that the number of Academy members has almost doubled in the past 5 years. Yeah. So I sense, Will, that you were going with that influx of new members is probably having a huge effect on some of these votes.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, you know, a lot of the new members are international voters, and we've started seeing that, you know, the last few years with Paweł Pawlikowski getting into Best Director, along with Alfonso Cuarón, Thomas Vinterberg last year, and Hamaguchi this year. I haven't checked, but I imagine this is some kind of record for most non-English language films getting nominations in a single year outside of the international film category. So I think that's really, really cool and opens the door for just generally much more exciting and interesting nominations across the board. I
also think I agree with everything you're saying, and I also think there's like a snowball effect. Like when more of these films break through and start to get these big nominations, stuff like Cold War, Roma, Parasite, obviously having a huge year, I think that it makes it real. It's like, oh, we can vote for any international movies that we want. They actually have a chance. It's not like we're just throwing them up there as fodder to get taken out by the inevitable American winners. It's like, no, Parasite might win, you know. So I feel like that also has a psychological effect. If people are more willing to vote for interesting movies that, you know, maybe haven't had as big a breakout moment in the US yet, because there's this realistic chance that they can really get through.
To that, it's also Penelope Cruz getting in for Parallel Mothers, like, you know, a non-English speaking part, and it shows, it reflects the audience, right? Like, it's not that this new diversity drive that the Academy's been doing. Like, you can really see that now in, as Will was saying, like in the nominations, and we've been seeing it. But that was such a strong performance, and she cracked through because, you know, Sony Pictures Classics, they really campaigned her. She was here when we were in lockdown for Omicron and, you know, not going anywhere. But, you know, people were out there filling, you know, whatever, you know, going to the movie theaters to see her at a Q&A, and she worked that nomination. But again, it's a reflection of the diversity of the Academy to see that Drive My Car and Flea too.
I was about to say, what an amazing morning Flea had. 3, you know, nominations for animated film, documentary, and international film. That's pretty stunning.
Yeah, I was terrified it was going to split votes and miss somewhere, or God forbid, everywhere. You know, like Waltz with Bashir, about 10 years ago, missed out an animated film. So yeah, to get all three is stunning and makes you wonder, honestly, if it wasn't kind of close to the Best Picture 10, in the top 15 or something, because that really suggests a lot of love across the board.
Right, spread around. That's what's interesting about that is it wasn't just, the animators who, really like focused in on that. It's like it seems like it's got broad support, which was interesting.
That being said, I am a little concerned now that it might split its own vote among those three categories. So it'll be interesting to see how this turns out, right?
Yeah, well, with the docs, usually there's the critic front runner has a tradition of missing, the Roger Ebert documentary, the Jane documentary, the Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood documentary. Almost every year, the film that wins the most critics groups for best documentary ends up getting snubbed. Apollo 11, so this year's Summer of Soul did not do that, and it has pretty much cleaned house with the critics group. So I think it's probably going to win the Oscar now, which, I'm sorry, Flea.
No, I'm with you. Like,
yeah.
Sorry,
it will be fun to be able to say Oscar winner Questlove. That's all.
For sure.
Right? To hear his name. But I'm with you because the documentary branch is, like Will was saying, they're always interesting because you're like, okay, this is the front runner and this is going to win. I'm thinking Brett Morgan, Jane, right? When that was campaigning, it was hitting every single precursor, winning every single critic award, and then come to I think it missed out on nomination morning. You're like, wait, where's our disconnect here? But I think Summer of Soul, by Questlove or Amir Thompson,
it's a great movie.
Probably gonna run away with it, and it's great.
One of my favorites of the year,
and Jazz,
documentary or scripted feature
for sure. Jazz, I feel like you were being very kind in your discussion of the documentary branch, which is usually they're usually the first to throw some kind of Molotov cocktail into the mix and get everybody all riled up and upset.
I mean, I guess with that this morning, Riding with Fire, right? Because did many people have that in their predictions? I'm not sure, right? I don't think I saw that show up, and that's the Molotov cocktail that they threw in this morning.
Well, in The Rescue Missing, that was a pretty big shocker because that seemed like kind of the natural, maybe more populist film that steps in and wins, like when you have something like Free Solo or Icarus, when the presumed frontrunner misses, you have one of those that's a big, accessible crowd pleaser. So I was pretty shocked that the Rescue Team missed out. So I guess that was kind of the Molotov cocktail, even if it wasn't the big critic frontrunner, but it was definitely a frontrunner.
Yeah. Well, let's dive in and talk about the categories that are near and dear to the hearts of the Dolby podcast, Best Sound and Cinematography. Let's start with Best Sound. So I got my list up here, and I'm just gonna read out. So what we found out this morning, the nominees for Best Sound are Belfast, Dune, No Time to Die, The Power of the Dog, and finally West Side Story. So, first reactions to that list. Any surprises? What are you guys' responses to it?
So that was pretty much, give or take, what I thought we were going to get. It tracked both the BAFTA and CAS lists pretty closely. My one concern was, as I understand it, the Bake Off this year, the Sound Bake Off, they didn't have reels of the sound. They had a single scene. And so I was concerned that voting being based on those clips wasn't going to favor Power of the Dog, even with the CAS nomination. And as I understand it, they picked the banjo piano scene, which is a great scene.
Of course they did. It's the iconic sound moment from the film, for sure. Yeah.
But it's also only a 2-minute scene. And so, that's a lot of the other films had 8-minute clips. I think that format also benefited Belfast because it missed the CAS, but it opened with, they use the opening scene where the riot breaks out, and that's a really just explosive sound moment. So even if you hadn't seen all of Belfast, if you saw that in a screening, you'd probably be like, oh man, that's, but yeah, so if there was anything that surprised me, I guess it was power overcoming what I thought might have been a bit of a handicap there. And that's really a testament to just what a great day that film had across the board. You know, it also got production design, despite missing all the precursors. You know, it got into editing. So yeah, that was the only slight surprise for me.
I'm with you on that. I think in terms of sound, like my alternate would have been A Quiet Place 2, which, you know, if we go back to A Quiet Place, the first one, you know, that landed so well. And I was like, yeah, Power of the Dog, I'm not quite sure, because, you know, you can go through the guilds and, you know, all the other things. I'm like, I don't know. But like, to Will's point, you know, it scored 11 nominations this morning, or I mean, it did so well. And I guess it's no surprise. And, you know, in the end, if you look at, it got cinematography, it got writing, it got editing, it landed everywhere it needed to land.
Yeah, I mean, I mostly agree. These are sort of largely where I thought it would go. I did think, you know, as Jazz said, Quiet Place 2 struck me as one. It's such a sound movie and a sound franchise, and that sort of the soundscape determines so much of the tension, and it's how they sort of build the horror element. So I thought maybe that would get in there. And then I did also think Tick, Tick, Boom had maybe a chance, just because of how its sort of meta approach to the musical adds a layer, you know, on top of that. Like, obviously West Side Story as well is blending, you know, working in that world of sort of, there's action, there's musical segments, but Tick, Tick, Boom's doing it, you know, switching off in such an interesting way, going from this sort of realistic world of Andrew Garfield's life to the larger than life song sequences. I thought that maybe was going to slip in there. And that might've been something as well with the individual scene, that you can't show as much off of, like, the variety of techniques that they're doing throughout the film, because you had to just show, you know, one segment. But yeah, I think a lot of sort of what we mostly would expect.
Yeah, so I just want to explain for our audience who may not understand a little bit of the insider baseball. So obviously, the sound category has had a tumultuous couple of years with a lot of changes. Up until last year, it used to be two separate Academy Awards, one for Best Sound Editing and one for Best Sound Mixing. Last year, that got combined into the Best Sound category. And then on top of all that, this thing that we're talking about, the Bake Off, is a really interesting kind of throwback phenomenon. I don't remember off the top of my head when the last Bake Off was, but it's been a good
2005.
Okay, so it's been 15, 16 years or 17 years since the last one. Thank you, Will. You have an encyclopedic knowledge about this stuff.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And were any of you actually at the Bake Off this year for sound?
I went to VFX. I didn't make it to sound.
Yeah, I didn't make it to sound either. I used to go. I've been to many of the ones in the past. It was always really kind of a nice night, because it was really rare for the sound community to actually get together and see each other and celebrate the work. And then everybody, of course, at the end would walk down the street to Kate Mantellini's and have several cocktails, and it was just sort of a big party atmosphere, which obviously was missing this year. But they did bring the tradition of the Bake Off back. And, you know, what you guys were talking about was, so the way the Bake Off worked was each of the films that were on the long list got to present a sequence. And in the past, it was an 8-minute sequence that the sound artists would cut together. But the rule was they had to actually take a 35 millimeter release print of the film and physically cut the print up and present that. And the reason why that was because they didn't want anybody doing any shenanigans and changing the mix, you know, by like taking the music out in order to feature the sound effects. So, but this year it was very different in terms of they had to pick like one continuous 8-minute sequence from the film. And I agree with you guys. I actually suspected that might hurt a film like The Power of the Dog, because there's really no sort of kind of, you know, big showcase sound moment in the film. And I wasn't there, so I don't even know what sequence they featured. I think, you know,
it was the banjo piano sequence. Yeah.
Fair enough, which is as close as you're going to get to sort of like the iconic sound moment from that film. But yeah, I'm sure it was an interesting night to be in the room. Now, and another interesting twist on it was previously when the Bake Offs happened, only the people that were in the room that night at the Goldwyn Theater at the Academy then voted on the movies that would become the nominees. So that was not the case this year. It still went out to the branch, and everybody got to vote on it. So before we move on to that, I'm gonna put you guys on the spot. Predictions for who's gonna walk away with the Academy Award for Best Sound this year?
Oh, Dune. Not even close, I think.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very inclined to go. Like, No Time to Die, I wouldn't be shocked, but I think Dune is probably the win. Yeah, always a chance with us lay people that you're going to get like most sound is going to win instead of
for sure.
best
But
sound.
Dune also has most sound.
Right. It really does.
In this case, Dune really does have most sound.
It's wall to wall sound and score, and yeah.
Before we move on to Jazz, you mentioned score. Any initial thoughts on the best original music category? What do you think is gonna walk away this year?
In score, I think Dune again. Hans Zimmer. Sorry to go there. I mean, I'll start with score. It's a great category because you've got Nicholas Britell nominated. You've got Jermaine Franco. You've got Johnny Greenwood for Power of the Dog. So that's a great category. But I think Hans Zimmer is going to run away with score. And then with song, I mean, again, Encanto, everybody's talking about Bruno. That song is so viral, and Dos Oruguitas is the song that Disney put forward for that film. But if Lin wins there, he gets his EGOT.
He finally gets his EGOT if he wins,
right? I think he's been chasing it for like 5 years. I think.
Let's be honest. He's been chasing it since he was a little boy. So,
but the surprise is Diane Warren getting in. Like Diane Warren, the power of Diane Warren knocking out Beyonce, Jay-Z, Kid Cudi, Ariana Grande. Like that's what she did. 13th nomination. That was a pleasant surprise. And Beyonce getting in for Be Alive. So, and Van Morrison too. So the song was interesting.
If they can get all those folks to perform at the Oscars, it might be a hell of a show. In fact, let's jump ahead because I wanted to ask you guys, like, what can be done to reinvigorate this Oscar ceremony? Of course, as everyone is aware, the ratings have been on a steady kind of a steady challenge trajectory for the past few years. What do you think? Like, I mean, obviously, if they got all those folks to perform at the Oscars, that could be huge.
Well, I think part of it is that they do need to, an extent, accept that people just don't tune in to watch award shows the way they used to. You're going to be able to watch the highlights online the next day, and increasingly, just by virtue, honestly, of a lot of what is even getting released. There's going to be a divide between what is selected as award-worthy and films that the general audiences in Middle America care about. And I think to an extent, AMPAS just needs to be okay with that. I know they're terrified of ABC, and
losing all the ad revenue and all that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But there's only so much they can do, ultimately, I think, without compromising the integrity of the show with something, like when they tried to add best popular film. And even then, I don't think that would work. So I think they need to focus mainly on just making it a good show for the audiences they have, so don't do what they've talked about before. Don't present certain categories during commercial breaks. Bring back the clips. I think for people who haven't seen all the movies, it helps for them to see even just a 1 minute segment from each performance. So in their own mind, they can kind of think of, this is who deserves it. This is who is going to win. I think that was something that was really missing last year. I think it will help having some of the performers like Beyonce there this year and Billie Eilish. But I think most importantly, they just need to focus on making a good show for the quintessential Oscars audiences, because ultimately, a lot of Gen Z and the random Middle America just doesn't care and won't care no matter what they do.
I sense a little fatalism in that, Will. Is basically just the sense of like, we're never going to see those, whatever the watershed year, the Titanic year. We're never going to see 50 million people watching the Oscars anymore, and we shouldn't even try for that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the film industry has changed. I think, what general audiences go to theaters to see has changed. I think what studios have greenlit has changed, and the way we consume shows and media has changed. I mean, like, you had to watch it on ABC on air at the time the year Titanic was there, and that's just not the case anymore. And I think that is a big factor.
I think it's as much to do with movies themselves as it is the TV and how people watch. I think it's just. I think I look at something like King Richard, and in past years, that would have gotten all these nominations on the back of being a crowd pleaser. That was the sort of movie that you would see audiences flocking to in like the 90s. A huge star. It's a biopic of a famous person. It's this inspirational, heartwarming. You could take the whole family. I mean, like, that's the kind of movie that, with that movie not attracting huge audiences and getting all that attention, like, that's the kind of movie the Oscars were always sort of built around. People who were rooting for King Richard and wanted to see that kind of movie win. So I think that, yeah, like, if you can't sell a movie like that to a mainstream crowd, you're never going to sell the Oscars to a mainstream crowd. It's like one tails the other. So I do sort of agree that I think that we've just sort of downsized the size of the audience that is really invested in movies enough to care about awards, as opposed to being invested enough in Marvel or Star Wars or a brand or something. So I don't really know what the Oscars as a show can do about that.
I also think they should bring back, because I know they did it last year, where they brought, they had original song performed outside of the main ceremony. It was like, bring that back in, especially this year when you've got, the nominees like Billie Eilish and Beyonce, who will appeal to, not just film Twitter or Oscar watchers. Maybe like an explainer, or like show the sound, show a clip of like editing. Let your layman understand what editing, what sound mixing, what sound editing is, like, and have somebody fun present that. I think just, and also like, the hosts, right? Like, you need somebody that, whatever everybody's watching right now, it's like, who's hosting? Like, find a host that's accessible. But then also at the same, having said that, it's like, this is the audience. There are Oscar watchers who really care about it. Cater to that audience.
Let's talk about cinematography. Greg Fraser for Dune, Dan Laustsen for Nightmare Alley, Ari Wegner for The Power of the Dog, Bruno Delmanel for The Tragedy of Macbeth, and Janusz Kaminski for West Side Story. First reactions, thoughts about these nominees and these movies? I think it's a stunning year for cinematography. Like, all these films just are iconic movies for me.
Brutal miss for West Side. For Belfast. I think Belfast missing editing and cinematography today is what I needed to see to convince me that it is not going to challenge Power of the Dog for Best Picture. Because, we've always known the branch and the Academy at large like black and white, and Belfast got in with the American Society of Cinematographers. It was perceived as, and
Janusz did not, right?
Correct.
So that was the switch in that category, right? For West Side Story,
And Janusz also missed BAFTA. So this was a good come from behind for him, but he's also Janusz Kaminski. He's a living legend. So, but my big takeaway was, I think that's a wrap on Belfast's chances. I love seeing Dan Laustsen make it. I thought that might be a ASC special, but that is a just gorgeous looking film. Del Toro and Laustsen really know how to move a camera, and the colors are so rich in that. So I was very happy to see that get in. And obviously Ari Wegner, that's a historic nomination. And if she pulls out the win over Greg Fraser for Dune, she would be the first woman ever to win for Best Cinematography. So that would be very cool.
I think I'm with you 100%. Like, I was hoping to see Belfast in here and Belfast in editing, but, Nightmare Alley has such incredible cinematography. Likewise, Tragedy of Macbeth, like, it's one of the things, like the way Bruno plays with light and shadow in that movie. Gosh, it's incredible. But the switch for Janusz getting in here and missing ASC was fascinating. I mean, who's going to win? I still think Greg, if I were to call it, Greg could win, but I don't know.
This one's a tough one to predict. I mean, for me,
it's tough to call. Yeah, I still feel like Dune probably pulls this one out. But my thought on the black and white thing too was: is it possible that Tragedy of Macbeth and Belfast split the hardcore black and white cinematography fans? Like there were two very prominent, very beautiful and starkly different approaches to black and white cinematography this year to choose from. That would probably, if I was going to pick my personal pick, I'd probably go with Del Bonnell for Macbeth.
Gorgeous work.
Incredible. Yeah. And you can't, as great as the performance is, that there's so much going on in that movie, at times I found I was almost not even paying attention to the Shakespeare because I was just soaking in this imagery that Joel Cohen and Del Bonnell put together. But I do think Dune is probably the winner, unless there's a Power of the Dog sweep happening, which I think it's possible. Like it's up in enough categories where we could just see Power of the Dog kind of run away with it and get a lot of wins.
Yeah, I was starting to wonder that, what if it pulls, the kind of thing that we saw in the 80s and 90s all the time. Just
it's the same movie, just powers through all the below the line categories.
It's the only movie this year that I feel like has that juggernaut potential to just take over in every category.
It's been a while. We're overdue that, right? What was the last
Slumdog
one to
was pretty much
probably Slum. Yeah. Wow, it's been a long time then.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Any movies that kind of got maybe didn't make either the BAFTA or the ASC that you would have loved to have seen get featured in this category?
The black and white work in Passing, I thought, was also really good. And how they used that to really enhance the storytelling. I thought that was excellent work. And I agree with you 100%. 100%. We're a little partial to that because Passing was Rebecca Hall won the Dolby Institute Fellowship with Passing last year. So we supported her finishing that movie in Dolby Vision and mixing it in Dolby Atmos. And I think to your point, that's actually a movie that would not have worked if it weren't in black and white. And it's what an amazing year for black and white photography between Come On and Passing. Yeah, I think it's and also quite frankly, if you haven't had a chance to see the black and white Dolby Vision pass of Nightmare Alley, it's stunning. So quite the year for black and white cinematography for sure. Oh yeah, and French Dispatch, half of that was black and white as well.
Yeah,
Robert Yeoman's work in that is gorgeous.
I was just going to say one that did get in for the ASC awards that did not get in for the Oscar that I was a little disappointed was Pig. I really like Pat Scola's work in Pig. I thought Nicolas Cage kind of ran away with all the heat from that movie. Deservedly so. It's a brilliant performance, but it is also an incredible looking movie. And the way the distinctions between when the sort of the opening, when you're in nature in the woods, and then the starkness of the city cinematography was, I thought, really beautifully done. Very subtle.
Well, I think you all agree that Dune is probably the winner, but I'll come at this from a slightly different direction. If you had a sixth slot that you could designate for a cinematography nominee, and it's just yours, and you get to pick. I'll ask you the same question for sound, but what would it be? Lon, would yours be Pig?
Yeah, I think I would probably go Pig on this one. I did also, I don't know, I wrote a little thing about Zola also, I thought, for directing or for cinematography and editing was overlooked, even though both were really well done, and the kind of work that doesn't often get recognized.
And that's I think my sixth slot.
Yeah. Well, I think my sixth slot would probably be Pig.
I didn't love the film as a whole as much as some people, but The Green Knight is gorgeous to look at. Every image in that is so just rich. So I might say that is the number 6.
That's a great choice.
I think my number 6 would be Robbie Ryan for Come On.
Mm-hmm. I really love that movie. Just fantastic. Beautifully shot, and just how he framed that dynamic between Joaquin Phoenix and Woody Norman. That's great. I'll ask you the same.
Gotta
I'll
love
ask
it.
you the same question about sound. If you got a sixth slot that you could pick, and one more nominee to go in there, what would you lean towards?
I'm going to be out of the box a little bit, and I'm going to say there's a film called The Killing of Two Lovers that came out last year, and that movie really gets under your skin the way you watch it. I was so glad, Neon scraped together a little money to put out a few FYC ads. The sound editor for that, a guy named Peter Albertson, is just incredible, and he keeps doing all these docs. He did the one about the lost Leonardo this past year, and that new one at Sundance about the Brazilian rainforest. But yeah, that's a movie that will make you have a panic attack just to listen to it. It is just designed to get under your skin. And it's just really, really creative sound design. So probably that.
I'll echo that, and just for our listeners, if you're interested in this, go back 6 months or so ago. We did a Dolby Institute podcast with Robert Machoian, who's the writer, director, and editor of The Killing of Two Lovers, with Peter Albrechtsen. We talked about the sound in detail. But you're right; that's one of the. I love talking about movies like that. It's a low budget, a micro budget indie movie that has fantastic use of sound as a storytelling device. And I feel like most filmmakers and most audiences think of like great sound as like big budget studio movies. But that's a great example of a really micro budget movie that has just impeccable use of sound. Jazz, what about you?
I would have to go back to what I was saying earlier, A Quiet Place 2. I think what they did with that sound, they terrified the crap out of you. It was one of the last movies I saw before, going back to March 2020, and it was one of the first films I saw, like, as we started going back to movie theaters, and just that experience of nobody wanting to make a sound because they thought a monster, one of the monsters would jump out and attack them. Like, just observing that was just quite the movie going experience, and nobody wanted to like touch their popcorn, even though everybody had it, or like you don't get the slurping of the drinks too. And I've said this before, it's like that to me deserves that sixth slot.
Well said. Lon, what about you?
Yeah, I love the idea of putting horror films like Quiet Place 2 in this category, like, because horror is one of those genres where you're really leaning on sound as like that's one of the key tools in your toolbox for like that mounting tension. So I would say there were a few others. In the Earth, Ben Wheatley's sort of psychedelic woodsy horror film from early this year had incredible sound. And I would also say a much maligned movie in some corners, but James Wan's Malignant, I would also highlight as a movie that had really terrific use of sound to just, add to this sort of crazy, chaotic atmosphere of the rest of the movie. So yeah, those were one of those. Quiet Place or one of those two gets my sixth.
Well said. Well said. Well, I think, I feel like Jane Campion and The Power of the Dog had a really, really good morning. It feels like they've got a lot of momentum heading into the home stretch here. What do you guys think about? Is it likely that Jane's going to run off with everything?
I for the longest time I was skeptical about if that film could close the deal, because it's an incredible film. It's one of my favorites of the years, but it's very slowly paced, and it's one of those things where this may come back to a changing Academy. Traditionally, I've kind of looked at would my grandparents like it, and for a long time that was a good barometer, but that may not be the case anymore, because I don't know that film is going to play as much to some of the old meat and potatoes voters, but I don't think it's going to matter. So yeah, I think we still need to see who wins the PGA. That is the only other group that votes on a preferential ballot like the Academy. So maybe something like King Richard benefits from that system. But certainly Belfast just kept taking L's today. So I don't think it's going to be that. And Licorice Pizza and Coda didn't have the kinds of days that they needed to really suggest that they're going to be threats. So barring a PGA surprise, yeah, I think Campion is taking home picture, director, adapted screenplay, and that film might even go bigger and take home an acting nomination or two. So yeah, it's looking very, very good for Netflix.
Well, and what to your point, I think, even pre-pandemic, I Netflix has been trying to get that, to bring home that big Oscar gold for a while, and I think pre-pandemic, there was the politics weren't there, but I don't sense that that's the case anymore. I don't know. I may be wrong.
I feel the politics has slipped away, especially now in this time of, the pandemic, where we've been, relying on streaming services to get access to entertainment. But yeah, I think I'm with Will. I mean, it could run away, or I feel like Jane Campion's definitely going to take home that director, and yeah, watch PGA and see who they pick. I think, if anything, yeah, Power of the Dog came out way ahead this morning. Now everybody else has to rethink. It's back to the drawing board, right? Like, Netflix is in such a good place right now with that movie, and everybody else is like, now what? Now what do we do? How do we campaign? He who campaigns best will be. So the next we're in this for 7 weeks. So the next 7 weeks will be a very interesting.
It feels it's longer this year, isn't it? I feel like we've got at least an extra couple of weeks.
Yeah, the 7 weeks is
Yeah.
Well, I mean, last year was April, but I mean, yeah, this other than last year, which was a weird year with an extended release schedule, this will be the latest the Oscars were, I think, since certainly this century. I think you have to go back to the 80s or 90s for when it was this late into March.
Sometimes the nominees come out and it feels like it's kind of it's anybody's game. It's sort of an open field. And then sometimes I think the nominees come out and it feels like there is a consensus pick is starting to form. And this to me feels like one of the consensus years where it's like, it feels like Power of the Dog is in a very strong position to take the top few categories and maybe even go on a deep run. So I totally agree with what everyone's saying.
But there's a lot of campaigning that can happen in the next few weeks for sure.
But hey, it's 8 weeks and literally anything can happen in 8 weeks. So who knows?
Yeah. And also, the PGA got delayed too. So, I mean, I think usually it will be interesting because it could be a situation where Netflix gets complacent because things have gone swimmingly, and then the PGA gets announces, and maybe it's something else. And unfortunately, that'll be, I think, like less than a week before Oscar voting starts now because it's delayed. So if that were to happen and you would need to get a different strategy, there's nothing you could do. So that's going to be a wild card because usually PGA is already announced before or at least almost immediately after nominations come out. So that's going to be interesting.
So before I let you guys go, I want your picks. If you were picking the Oscar, you brought it up earlier. If you were picking the Oscar host, who would you pick?
Wow.
I mean, right now I would go for Tracy Ellis Ross and Leslie Jordan. I think those two. I mean,
after their triumph this morning, reading off the nominations,
I'd love to see them do it for another 4 hours or however long our ceremony is going to be this year. Yeah, that's my pick.
Fair enough.
I mean, I've already thrown out the Muppets, who I think for sure get the Henson Company folks on the horn. I do think there was some discussion about, well, since Spider-Man is not scoring the nominations that people host, maybe get Zendaya and Tom Holland out there, and that would be a good way to bring in the kids and get people excited. I'm down for that. I think that sounds good. If that's going to get more people watching and open up the tent a little bit, I'm all for it. Let's do it.
I'm skeptical about whether that's going to get the kids to tune in, but
yeah,
I don't necessarily think so either. But hey, you know what? We're desperate. Let's try anything at this point.
Fair enough. Will, what's your pick?
I saw somebody on Twitter mention that they should try to get the cast of Only Murders in the Building to host, and that would be, I feel like that would be so good. Steve Martin's done it before, and then Martin Short would be fun. So that would be fun if that happened.
Fair enough. All right, Jazz, Will, Lon, thank you so much for taking the time today to share with us your thoughts about Oscars and about our favorite categories, sound and cinematography. Really appreciate you joining the show today.
Of course.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for having us.
Well, many thanks once again to Jazz, Will, and Lon for joining us today for a really fun conversation. about the Academy Award nominees in the Best Sound and Best Cinematography categories, as well as a kind of an existential conversation about the Oscars themselves. You should follow each one of them on Twitter. They just have so many great insights about film in general. And so you can find links to all their accounts in our show notes. I'd also like to thank in advance all the Oscar nominees who will be joining us in the coming weeks to celebrate their nominations and to talk about the fine work and all of the nominated films. So that's right. Once again, we are working to pull together interviews from each of the nominees in the Best Sound and Best Cinematography categories to pull together into one single episode, focusing on all the great work done this year, so that you can help have a more informed Oscar ballot to fill out. So whether you're an Academy voter or somebody who just wants to do better in the annual office pool, please join us for the next few episodes of the Dolby Institute podcast. You can find us, as always, wherever you get your podcasts, just by searching for Dolby or by clicking the link in our show notes. Until then, thanks again for joining us. This is Sound and Image Lab, brought to you by the Dolby Institute. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with production support by Taylor Hines, and our production coordinator is Sunny Chen. Thank you for listening.